Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I head out for a walk, and deliver an episode to you while I stroll around. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, hello listeners. It is Wednesday, February 24th. And I am coming to you from the parking lot of the facility where my daughter does her swim practice. I am taking a stroll around the parking lot. The weather is much nicer than last time I did this, but there's not really anywhere else for me to go, and I didn't really have time to take a walk at another time. So this seems like as good a time as any. So today I thought I would talk with you a little about a topic inspired by something that happened yesterday. So yesterday, we were driving home from I'm walking by a storm drain. You'll be able to count how many laps I take around the parking lot by how often you hear that storm drain. So yesterday, when my daughter and I were driving home from swim practice, we were driving toward our house, and driving that way, there was a road we're on where if we continued, instead of turning toward our house, we would drive toward the sort of downtown commercial area of the suburb I live in. Well, I noticed two helicopters hovering in the air, roughly, half a mile or a mile ahead of us, in what I guesstimated was a position over the railroad tracks that run through the middle of our town. Now, as you longtime listeners, people who've been listening since before the pandemic started, you'll know that my main time for recording this podcast is on my way home from the train. I take the train into work, and it is on my walk home from getting off the train that I used to record this podcast, and we'll get back to when the world gets back to normal, or whatever the new normal is. So, having thought about that a little bit, so I see these helicopters hovering there, and I say, I wonder what those helicopters are for. And my daughter's like, I don't know. And I say, well, usually helicopters hovering like that are news helicopters, because these weren't like black spy government helicopters. They were. So I said, those are usually news helicopters. And usually when they're hovering, they're either showing a bad traffic jam and or a traffic accident, or some other thing that looks cool from above. And I'm using cool a little glibly here, of course, not to celebrate the sad things that cause the news, but I was thinking about whatever it is, it has to look neat from above to make it worthwhile having a helicopter hover over it. And so, judging by where I thought they probably were, I said, I wonder if it has something to do with the train. I hope nobody was hurt, but it's probably something to do with the train. And we okay. And so we drove home, and as we were driving home, we passed one of my neighbors out walking his dog, and I rolled down the window. I said, hey, did you see the helicopters over downtown? He's like, yeah. I said, you know what that's about? He goes, no, but it's probably something with the train. Later that evening, we learned indeed that it was true. There was an accident and a person died. They got hit by the train, which is horrible, of course. But it got me thinking about systems and familiarity and intuition. It also got me thinking some sort of it's weird to me that I would know that it was something to do with the train, and I would suspect that someone had died. It's weird to me that two helicopters in the air tell me someone probably got hit by a train. That is a weird set of logics that exist in my brain. But it got me thinking about games and game design and how we play games. It also got me thinking about the idea of a learning curve. There was an interesting post on Board Game Geek today where somebody was sort of pedantically saying it drives them crazy when podcast reviewers or when board game reviewers say a game has a steep learning curve, because generally a steep learning curve, because from the technical standpoint, a steep learning curve is something where you learn to do something quickly, apparently, whereas the common usage of the phrase steep learning curve means it is difficult to learn. You have to learn a lot quickly in order to use it, meaning it's difficult. So I was thinking about those two things together and how we acquire new games. And I was particularly thinking about them in the context of the person I acquire new games with most, at least in terms of learning to play them, and that's my wife. Now, my wife is, as you know from listening, a pretty avid gamer, although she doesn't necessarily acknowledge that herself, and certainly isn't as avid as me. But we certainly are at the point now where she will suggest games regularly, and she plays a whole lot of games, and she refers to them as our games. And, this is part of her hobby as well. But we have a kind of running idea there's a kind of running common assumption in our family that when we get a new game, she will usually win the first game. Not always, but often. And then after that, my daughter and I will become more skilled at the game, and it will be less likely that my wife will win the second or third play. Now, there are some games that we end up playing a lot, and I've found that win ratio evens out over time. There are other games where, on that second or third play, it appears to just not be as fun, and so then often that game kind of gets cycled toward the back of the cupboard, and the figurative back of the cupboard, and we don't end up playing it that much, and then we never get past to that initial bump of, say, 5 games that it takes to really familiarize yourself with how a game works. So I guess what I want to talk about is these competing ideas of familiarity, intuition, experience, and the ability to spot systems. And it's that spotting systems that I'm talking about when I think of what happened with the helicopter. I thought I would describe here how our family learns a new game. Well, when we get a new game in, I punch the pieces out. Normally, I've purchased it. I punch the pieces out and I read the rules. And then at a time when it's convenient, my wife and sometimes my daughter, and even more rarely, but occasionally my son, will sit down to play the game, and I will teach the game, and then we'll play it together. As often as not in that first game, my wife or my daughter will win the first game, and I will come in close to last, if not last. In part, that's because I do my best to teach the game to other people in a way that helps them learn it on the first one, and I'm not as concerned with doing well myself. Another thing I've discovered about myself is that I am more likely to want to play a new game in a way that tries to explore the parts I don't understand, or the parts that don't seem as easy to grok. And so sometimes I'll wander down a gameplay path that ends up not being that effective because I kind of want to see how it works. And so I'm sort of spending my time in that first game learning how it works. And thus I often just don't do as well. Whereas my wife will often catch on to a system that will get her a lot of points and kind of double down on that system. So whereas I kind of meander around the game looking at the different corners of it, and as a result don't do anything very well, my wife often picks one thing and does it pretty well. And in complex games that reward multiple systems, sometimes doing more things better means later when we play, I will do better, but you never know. So, this is the part where intuition becomes an important element. So for my wife, I think, she intuitively catches a thing that she can see gets her points or pushes toward the winning goal of the game. And then she chases that particular one. She's more likely to be focused in a way that ignores the things that don't clearly make sense to her about how you get points or whatever. By contrast, if I see a thing that the game tells me should get me points, I want to push on it to try to figure out how to get points out of it. So, and then when we go back to play later, I've learned from that, assuming we play again soon. If we wait a long time, often my wife will then win again because I've forgotten most of what I learned and I have to kind of re-explore it. Whereas, so often if we're inexperienced, her strategies will pay off better than mine in the first on each play. And then as we become more familiar with the game, often I will pick up the nuances that allow me to eke out additional payoffs that maybe aren't as clear to her after that first play. And then finally, once we've played several times, generally the game starts to balance out and we tend to win based on where our skills lie better or what kinds of games click with how we think. So I thought I would talk about 4 different games and our experiences playing them as a way to give you a sense of how these different learning styles and approaches to what games work resolve in our family. And then, maybe that translates to your experience learning games. So the first game I wanted to talk about is Century. The original version is called Century Spice Road. In our family, we play Century Gollum Edition because we like fantasy stuff more than trading spices. So in Century Gollum Edition, you are basically building an engine in which you convert gems into other gems and then spend those gems to get cards, and those cards then get you points. That's the whole thing. My wife often focuses on relatively simple engines in that game that convert to points sort of linearly. My strategy almost always focuses on getting cards that can convert every kind of gem into every other kind of gem. So I often take a little longer to get rolling on using my engine. But the other thing that I really focus on is when I use the cards that convert gems into other gems, one of the key rules in Century is that on those cards, and those cards only, you can do multiple iterations of the conversion. So if you have a card that converts 1 blue into 3 green, you could do that twice or 3 times on the same turn if you had the 3 blue you would need to fuel that exchange 3 times. Now this is always the cornerstone of my game. I don't always win, but I win the majority of the games of Century I played. I probably 60 to 70% of the games of Century that I play, I win. Which, I'm usually playing 2 or 3 or like 3 or 4 players. That's not one that my wife and I play 2-player very often. And so that one is one where it suits my skills and the kinds of things that I'm interested in doing. Now, for some reason, that multiplicity part where you're converting multiple things at the same time has never been part of what my wife picked up. And so she's usually not the winner of that game. The times that she does win, it's when she really manages to capture a golem early before I've gotten my engine going. And then she pushes us toward a quick end by going for the cheap golems before I really have time to get things rolling. When she's won, that's usually how it happens. Now, I will say the second one, the Eastern Mountains, was not as big a hit as the original Century was. My wife did not like the different kinds of set collection because you're supposed to build these little houses and still converting things, but it's the houses and the shape and number of houses that you build that really get you points. And that kind of grid building is not her favorite. So that's Century. On the other end, a game where my wife wins probably 60% of our plays, but we play not exclusively 2-player, but I'd say 75% of our games are 2-player, and she wins 2/3 of them, or 3/4, is the game London by Martin Wallace. Now, we have London's 2nd edition, which is really nice, and I like it. It gets rid of the board and uses these cards to designate the boroughs instead of using a board. And it's excellent. Really interesting little sort of partial engine builder that has a devastating economy element to it. And now this is one of those places where it's my internal skills or habits that I cannot catch up with her. That the patterns of cards that she plays out consistently outperform the patterns that I play. Also, I have never been able to figure out how to make loans work well in that game. The loan system in London, you can take one loan for $10, or there's one borough you can get where you could take a loan for $12 instead of $10. But when you pay back, you have to pay back $15. So it's a very expensive loan. And every time you run your city, for every loan you have, you get an extra poverty. I know I've talked in the past about how the poverty works in this game. It is a brutal punishment if you let it get out of control. And one of the things that is the thing that makes that game so amazing. But it also means that it's really hard to take a loan and have it be productive because either it's generating poverty for you all the time, or you have to pay it back right away, in which case you just wasted £5. And unless you got something that generated more than £5 for you out of that £10 loan, I mean, you'd have to get something that's generating, you take a £10 loan to buy something or pay for something, and it has to get you 15 back, or else it's not a good deal. Plus whatever points or whatever you get from it. So the loans are not a good deal, I don't think. But part of me says they must be. And I've also seen players do really well taking loans. So that makes me think, I must be doing something wrong. And so I keep wanting to take loans to really figure out how to make the game work, and I just can't get it to work. So that I'd offer that as an excuse of why I do so poorly at London. But also just my wife is very good at it. And London, we got across that gap, I think 2 years ago I had London in my 10 for 10 list, so we played it a lot. And as a result, we're very familiar with it. We play it maybe once every 3 months or so now. And when we play it, we don't have to remind ourselves how to play. We just get the cards out and, we go. It's a game we know how to play really well. It's one of our staple games. We like it a lot. We're really good at it. But she's better. All right, so the next game that I'll mention that I think fits really well into this question of intuition versus familiarity versus recognizing systems is Cartographers. Now, Cartographers is one that we really like, and this is one where the activity of the game and the tactile pleasure of the game outweighs the gameplay for my wife. Because I would say my wife is more competitive than I am. I can enjoy playing a game lots and lots of times and losing every time. Case in point, Ray Greenlee. I don't know if you're listening, Ray, but hey, Ray. Ray and I have played more than 50 games of Through the Ages on Board Game Arena, and I have yet to win. One of these days. So my wife and I play Cartographers, and I would say we actually have a pretty even spread of wins in that game, but I come out ahead a little more often than she does. And this is a game where it's about sort of these pattern matching and spatial relations. So I tend to do a little bit better at the game than she does. And so this is one where we've both come to understand the game pretty well. We know what cards come out. We know the rhythm of the game. We know the different bonuses. So it's settled into the places where I tend to be able to better plan for all 4 win conditions at the same time than she is. I will say though, having taken my extensive 2-player experience of Cartographers and gone out in the wider world with it, I'm not very good at Cartographers by comparison to other people. Lots of other people do much, much better than I do, and it's a little embarrassing actually. But so that's my experience with Cartographers. I'll be interested to see what happens when the expansions come in and we get a slightly wider variety of cards and a slightly wider variety of things we can do, right? There are these special powers and there are these hero cards that you can get, and all of this will change how Cartographers works, hopefully making it continue to be interesting. All right, the last game I want to talk about is Everdell. Everdell from Starling Games, designer James Wilson, is a really interesting engine building game. It's got a little bit of worker placement in it. It's got this excellent tableau. You're building this tableau of cards, and some of them will trigger at various times. Some of the cards get you bonus actions by way of these little icons in the corner. A lot of them will chain together in really interesting ways. And this is another one where the ebb and flow of our skills in the game has come back and forth over time. That early on, the first couple of plays we had of this, my wife clobbered me quite soundly. And then I came back and came to understand some of the things, and I had my share of wins. And now we've settled into a kind of détente in which we each win about half the time, often depending on what kind of cards we get, and if those cards lean into the strategies we're used to using. My wife tends to be very good at getting the achievements, like the special journeys and some of those things that pay off well. I tend to lean toward achieving the little bonus cards on the top, getting coins, which is not actually a very good strategy, and getting points through the purple cards and the blue cards. We're both pretty good at making at getting some of the chain reactions going, and we both really like the expansions that we've got so far. We have 2 of them. I know there's one more that's been published, and I just heard that there are 2 or 3 more on their way. So it'll be interesting to see what comes from that. But Everdell is another one of those where over time we have gotten good at playing the game, and our intuition gives us room to operate on certain paths, and then we are able to accelerate there and really make the game sing. So the last game I want to mention here before we wrap up is the game Obsession. This is a new one to our collection. I got it last autumn, and we've really enjoyed having it in the house. We've played it half a dozen times or so, and the theme really keeps us coming back. It's a fun theme. It's sort of like playing Downton Abbey, the board game. And the gameplay itself, while rather complicated, is not actually that difficult once you kind of understand the rhythm of the game. There's lots to keep track of, but it fits our style pretty well. What's interesting to me about the gameplay of it is that we're currently in the state where I tend to be winning. The last couple times we've played, I've won. Although when my wife wins, she often wins decisively. she's had some really great games. But one of the things that the game deceives you with is the in-game points versus the end-game points. During the game, there are lots of points to be earned by winning these sort of minor competitions to get these victory cards. But the victory cards will get you like between 4 and 8 points apiece. And there's 4 rounds where you can get one of these victory cards. By contrast, there's this reputation thing that over the course of the game, you need to raise your reputation. And basically, it seems like you can't win the game if you don't pay attention to your reputation in the game. Because we always play the longer version, which goes 20 rounds instead of 16. And during that time, you can raise your reputation up to level 9. Well, each level you get your reputation higher, the points go up significantly. So like the difference between level 8 and level 9 is, I think, 10 points or 8 points or something. So it's like 1 or 2 of those victory cards just in your reputation. And you have 9 points or 9 levels of reputation to get. Now, the difference in points between level 1 reputation and level 2 is pretty minimal. But so this is one of the places where I put a lot more effort into maxing out my reputation than my wife does usually. I mean, this last time around, she got we all got the max reputation. And I feel like that's one of those things where everybody has to. So it'll be interesting to see as we continue to play it how we expand our abilities and where our instincts settle in terms of the game. Because there's a lot of different avenues to gaining points, and I think it fits our mix of skills. So I will check back at some point and do a message from the deep game about obsession, because we were definitely playing it enough that it will make that line. So I'm curious, what ideas does this spark in you? What games have you played enough to kind of see how your understanding of them changes and to watch that grow? Head over to Board Game Geek Guild 3269 and join the conversation there, where I'd love to hear a little bit about your thoughts on learning games and the learning curve as you learn to play them. You can reach out to me on Board Game Geek. I'm using Wombat929, or you can email me, Brendan@Rattlebox Games. Thanks for joining me today. I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.